Obi-Wan Kenobi was born on the planet Sujan 57 years before the Battle of Yavin, and as a Force-sensitive infant he was taken to the Jedi Temple to be trained as a Jedi. At the age of 12, though he developed through his Jedi training rather quickly, he unfortunately was not chosen for apprenticeship at first. After aiding Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn in his struggle against his former Padawan Xanatos, Jinn would finally accept Kenobi as his new apprentice. Over the next 13 years, Jinn and Kenobi would take part in several assignments which included spending an entire year on Mandalore, in which they would protect Duchess Satine from insurgents who want to threaten her planet, rescuing Priestess Thea from a metal clan on her home planet, and the pair would even take part in the Stark's hyperspace war. Jinn and Kenobi's final assignment together would have the pair deal with the invasion of Naboo that saw the Trade Federation place a blockade around the planet, and though the pair were successful in taking the Queen of Naboo off the planet, on their way back to Coruscant their ship would be damaged, forcing them to have to land on the desert planet of Tatooine for repairs. While there, Jinn was successful in freeing a young slave boy named Anakin Skywalker, and before they left, managed to engage a mysterious warrior who Jinn believed to be a Sith. Once back on Coruscant, Jinn requested that Anakin be tested and become his new Padawan, stating that Kenobi was ready for his trials. The Jedi postponed their decision, revealing that with the Queen of Naboo not receiving any help from the Senate, that she decided to return back to Naboo to take back her planet. Jinn and Kenobi will return back to Naboo with the Queen to take part in the Battle of Naboo, and it was during this battle that Jinn and Kenobi would battle Darth Maul together. But after Maul was successful in separating Jinn from Kenobi, Qui-Gon will be struck down, with Kenobi cutting Maul in half moments later using his master's lightsaber. Sadly, however, Kenobi was too late to save Qui-Gon. In his final moments, Qui-Gon Jinn made Kenobi promise that he would train Anakin, believing that he was indeed the chosen one. Obi-Wan Kenobi would be granted the rank of Jedi Knight, with Anakin becoming his first apprentice, and over the next 10 years would train Anakin, and their pair would even find themselves eventually taking part in the first battle of the Clone Wars on the planet Geonosis. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker would battle the former Jedi, now Sith Lord Count Dooku, but both would be defeated, with the Count escaping the planet once Grandmaster Yoda had arrived. Over the next 3 years during the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi would be made a general of the Republic Army and would take part in many battles across the galaxy. He would even be eventually promoted to the rank of Jedi Master and be given a seat on the Jedi Council. His final assignment with his former Padawan Anakin Skywalker, who is now a full-fledged Jedi Knight, would have the pair attempt to rescue the Supreme Chancellor Palpatine from the Separatists. During this mission, Anakin would successfully kill Count Dooku and save the Chancellor. Shortly after returning to the Jedi Temple, it was revealed that General Grievous was on the planet Utapau, and Kenobi was voted to go to Utapau to defeat the general, possibly ending the war. While on Utapau, Order 66 was issued, and Kenobi was fired on by his own troops. Kenobi managed to escape Utapau and reunite with Grand Master Yoda, and once the two Jedi Masters had returned to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, it was there that Kenobi discovered that it was Anakin Skywalker, now going by the name Darth Vader, who was responsible for the attack. Kenobi would track Vader to the planet of Mustafar, and after an intense battle, Kenobi would defeat Vader, leaving him for dead on Mustafar. Kenobi would then take Vader's newborn son Luke Skywalker to his relatives on Tatooine, and over the next 19 years Kenobi would look after him. After saving Luke Skywalker from a gang of sand people, Luke would show Kenobi a message from Princess Leia Organa requesting his help. With the help of the smuggler Han Solo and his Wookiee friend Chewbacca, Kenobi and Luke would make their way to the planet of Alderaan, only to find that the planet had been completely destroyed by the newly built space station, the Death Star. While Luke, Han, Chewie would successfully rescue the princess, Kenobi would find himself facing his older apprentice Darth Vader. Kenobi would sacrifice himself and become one with the Force, allowing his allies to escape the Death Star. For several years after his death, Kenobi would continue to guide Luke during his training to become a Jedi, before eventually leaving the physical plane and allowing his spirit to move on for good. Exar Kun was born over 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, and like many Force-sensitive infants during his time, he was taken by the Jedi Order for training, and spent many years training on the planet of Dantooine under Jedi Master Vodo Sios Boss. Proving to be a very talented student, Kun developed quickly both of his skills with the Force and with the skills with a lightsaber. And believing himself to be more than ready to learn the forbidden knowledges of the Force, Kun got his hands on Master Vodo's holocron, and it was at this time that he first heard the name Freedon Nad, who was a fallen Jedi who would become Dark Lord of the Sith. Curious to learn more about the Sith Lord, Kun would eventually make his way to Korriban, which was the home planet of the Sith, and while exploring the long-forgotten tombs of the ancient Valley of the Dark Lords, he was contacted by the spirit of Freedon Nad. After Nad tricked Kun into getting close to a crystal containing the souls of many lost Jedi, Kun would then be seriously injured once Nad had exploded the crystal. Nad then gave Kun a choice that he could either die here on the planet or surrender himself to the dark side of the Force. Not wanting to die there, Kun accepted Nad's offer, and after Nad healed Kun's body, his screams echoed across the Force that were so severe that even other Jedi and his own master could hear them. The spirit of Freedon Nad would then guide Kun to Yavin 4, where he was supposed to explore a Sith tomb that belonged to the powerful Sith sorcerer Naga Sadah. Shortly after arriving on Yavin 4, Kun would be captured by the Masashi warriors, who were the descendants of Naga Sadah's followers, and offered Kun as a sacrifice to a giant Sith worm. Seeing no other choice, Exar Kun would reach out with the dark side of the Force and laid claim to a nearby Sith amulet. Channeling his rage with the dark side of the Force, Kun fired a powerful blast of dark side energy and successfully managed to kill the Sith worm, and in the process gained the loyalty of the Masashi warriors. Nad then appeared once more to Kun, stating that it was now time for their work to begin to create a new physical body for Nad to use to cause his return. But at that time, Kun had grown tired of Nad's manipulation over him, and now using his newly claimed amulet, attacked the spirit, obliterating all that remained of Freedon Nad once and for all. Over the next few months, Exar Kun would establish his power over the Masashi by growing in power and even having the Masashi build a new temple in Kun's name. Discovering Naga Sadah's flagship, the Corsair, Exar Kun would lead the Masashi to the planet Empress Tita to hunt down and kill the last of Freedon Nad's students. It was here that Kun would encounter another fallen Jedi named Ulic Qel-Droma, who just so happened to possess the second Sith amulet. After knocking Alima Keto unconscious with his amulet, Kun and Ulic would battle each other, only for their battle to be interrupted by the appearance of the Dark Lord Marcus Ragnos. Marcus Ragnos declared that Exar Kun was to become the new Sith Lord, with Ulic being his apprentice. Joining forces, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma resolved to bring down the Jedi and the galaxy. By 3996 before the Battle of Yavin, the Great Sith War had begun, and Exar Kun had successfully recruited a number of young Jedi to his side. While building up their forces, Ulic attempted to attack Coruscant, but he was defeated and captured by the Republic with the help of the Jedi. After hearing that Ulic had been captured by the Republic, Exar Kun executed a rescue operation to recover his apprentice, and not only was he successful in recovering Ulic, but he managed to confront and kill his old Jedi Master Vodo Silas Boss. After their success on Coruscant, the two Sith Lords would lead their forces on an attack on the Jedi Library on the planet Ossus, and though the Sith were victorious, it came at a great cost to the Sith. During the battle, Ulic cut down his own brother, only to have his connection to the Force severed by Jedi Nomi Sunrider. Overcome with grief after killing his brother, Ulic informed the Jedi of the location of Exar Kun's main base on Yavin 4. Shortly after returning to Yavin 4, Kun's forces would be attacked by the full strength of the Jedi Order and the Republic Navy, and seeing that he could not win this battle, and unwilling to accept defeat, Kun would perform a powerful Sith ritual, sacrificing all of the Masashi warriors in order to keep his spirit alive and trapped within his temple. After thousands of years had passed, Luke Skywalker would begin to start rebuilding a new Jedi Order on Yavin 4, and now seeing his opportunity, Exar Kun, still as a Sith spirit, would finally return in an attempt to turn all of Luke Skywalker's students into a new Sith Order. However, with the combined effort of Luke Skywalker, his students, and even the spirit of Kun's old Jedi Master Vodo Silas Boss, Kun's spirit was finally banished forever, where he could do no more harm. Well, what's up again there, folks? Brian, the Three Topics Gamer here to bring you a very special Versus Series matchup for all of you to hopefully enjoy. As for the very first time, I'll be diving into the very franchise that inspired me to start my own Versus Series, which, as I'm sure as most of you already know, was Star Wars. But before I begin, I would really appreciate it if you could press that subscribe button and like button to help spread the word and grow the channel, and you can also follow me on all of my social media outlets and links in the description to keep track of me and all my future projects. Now, the reason I picked this particular matchup is actually quite simple. Now that this season does seem to be possibly the final year that I do this, I felt that at least once I want to tackle the Star Wars franchise and pick a matchup between two characters that I felt very personal about. Now, I'm stating this right now, that I am extremely biased towards both of these characters. So instead of pitting each of them against a random character, I decided to pit them both against each other. As my all-time favorite Star Wars character of all time, Obi-Wan Kenobi, will go up against my all-time favorite lightsaber duelist of all time in Exar Kun. So either way you push it, it's kind of hard for me to choose to decide who's going to end up winning. And regardless of who wins, it's going to be very painful for me. Now, as I'm sure you guys can see from the length of this video, voted on by the mass majority of you, I will be returning to the older classic style of my format of Versus Series that I've been using over the past 4 years. But don't worry, for those of you who are much fonder of my newer, shorter style of format, I will continue to be using that style moving forward after this video. I just want to tackle this specific video with this older style at least one last time. And just like that, since this matchup is so personal to me and I want to make sure I get it done, hopefully I can get some recognition from a certain Jedi Council who I've been watching for many years. Now, before I begin, I would just like to state that I'll be using these two combatants as they were during the primes of their lives. So I'll be using Obi-Wan Kenobi as he was during the final days of the Clone Wars in Revenge of the Sith, and Exar Kun as he was during the Great Sith War. So with that out of the way, it's time to compare and contrast, and even go old school, and we will start by comparing these two physically. By the time of Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan Kenobi was a 37 human male standing 5'11" and was in fantastic shape, still being well within his physical prime. Though his capabilities with strength, speed, and reflexes and stamina were exceptional, they were nothing uncommon outside of the vast majority of Jedi during his time, with the help of Force augmentations. However, the one physical department that easily places him in a class by himself is his durability, which is absolutely insane. It is by no means an exaggeration to state that Kenobi has survived through more physical damage than any Jedi throughout the entire Clone Wars. This man has been shot, blown up, hit with the lightsaber, fallen off buildings, survived several crashes in starships, has been tossed like a ragdoll with telekinesis, taken several enhanced physical strikes, survived being tortured for months by Asajj Ventress, and the list goes on and on. Though I personally wouldn't classify Kenobi as a human tank, there is simply no question that whoever he goes up against, Kenobi is going to make his opponent work for it in order to bring him down. You'd better pierce this man's heart or cut his head off, because he is not going down easy. By the time of the Great Sith War of 3996 BBY, Exar Kun was a solidly built human male standing 6'2", and though we don't know exactly how old he was by the time of his physical death, good estimates would place him being in his mid to late 20s. While being trained to become a Jedi, Exar Kun's personal approach to combat was to be as offensive as possible, supporting the claim that a good defense was an overwhelming offense, so his physical build would have focused on enhancing those specific qualities. His strength and speed were considerable, however, because of his primary focus on offense, it could cause his stamina to burn out much faster than most, and when his connection to the Force was ever compromised, Exar Kun has consistently shown that he is not able to take physical blows very well, as during his training he was easily subdued by the likes of his master boss, and was even scarred across his face during a sparring match with fellow trainee Silvar. However, Exar Kun was by no means a pushover or weak in any physical case, as all of his physical failures have been shown to have happened much earlier in his life, and by the time of the Great Sith War, he was more than likely much stronger in his physical performance to even overcome those circumstantial weaknesses, as his opponents never got a chance to take advantage of those weaknesses. So while Exar Kun should be commended for being able to overcome his physical drawbacks, when compared to other combatants, that doesn't stop those weaknesses from ever being there. When comparing these two physically, there is no question that Exar Kun is a well-built combatant who can easily contend with the mass majority of Force-enhanced combatants throughout the Star Wars franchise, and though he himself is certainly in his physical prime, I don't believe that Kun has yet reached the physical peak of his prime. And had the Great Sith War lasted just a few more years longer, then I certainly could see him eventually reaching that peak, while Kenobi certainly has. Kenobi has an insane amount of durability, and that places him far above Kun, as Kun has had parts of temples fall on top of him, giving him severe injuries, and this is certainly something that I could see Kenobi walking away from. And when one takes Kenobi's personal favorite combative approach into effect, which we will talk about much later on, it means that Kenobi's physical focus is meant for survivability and longevity, and while I do believe that Kenobi is slightly behind Kun in a physical department of strength and speed, these are departments that Kenobi has contended with before, and if Kenobi sticks to what he knows best, then in a physical sense, it would only be a matter of time before Kun burns himself out, unless he changes up his entire approach to combat. And should Kenobi manage to somehow deliver a series of physical strikes to Kun, then I can certainly see Kenobi outlasting Exar Kun in a physical sense, and it is for all these reasons that Obi-Wan Kenobi gets the physical edge. Though Kenobi would eventually elevate himself to the rank of Jedi Master and even be granted a seat on the Jedi Council, he was far from being one of the most powerful Jedi of his time. With him being classified as a Jedi Guardian, his Force powers in all departments took a backseat to his skills with the lightsaber. However, what he may have lacked in magnitude and power, he settled with variety and creativity. He was a skilled hand at using all of the typical Force powers that the Jedi were known for, like telekinesis, the mind trick, physical Force augmentation, and even the beast control ability. With his use of telekinesis, he was able to perform simple pulls and pushes to retrieve items, or, in very rare cases, was able to even off-balance his opponents and even perform the powerful Force repulse ability. But he also was capable of extraordinary abilities such as being able to tap into the full power of the Force and allow it to control his actions, as shown in his final battle with General Grievous. Kenobi was also talented with the use of two Tementus, capable of protecting himself from flamethrowers, blaster bolts, and even physical projectiles, though blocking Force lightning was well beyond his ability to defend against, and instead he would rely upon using his lightsaber. But his most noticeable power was his ability to become one with the Force and maintain his individual consciousness even after his physical death. Now, despite how creative Kenobi could be with his use of the Force, he did however have one noticeable weakness that has gotten him into a lot of trouble over the course of his life. There is a widespread belief that due to Kenobi's passive nature with his use of the Force, and placing his use of the Force in the backseat behind his skills with a lightsaber, that somehow he possessed a rather weak Force barrier. However, I believe I'm one of the few individuals out there that doesn't believe that this is the case. Based on my own personal logical viewpoint, it doesn't make sense for a Jedi Council master like Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose entire mentality in combat is based upon survival, longevity, and above all defense, to have such a glaring weakness that any second-rate or even third-rate Force user could exploit. I believe his Force barrier was just as strong as any other Jedi Council members, apart from, say, Grandmaster Yoda himself, and instead, one should look at who exactly is penetrating his barriers and under what conditions. Count Dooku is an overall more powerful Force user than Kenobi in every way, so of course he would be able to pull it off. Darth Maul, having a personal gripe of Kenobi, would experience momentary amps in his power, and the dark side is well known to be driven by negative emotion. and when someone like Asajj Ventress managed to use telekinesis on him, one must remember that she was fighting Kenobi in the middle of a swamp that was full of dead Gungan corpses, making the area a tiny dark-side nexus, thereby severely amping her power. Therefore, I do not believe that Ventress could have performed this feat under normal circumstances unless she managed to catch Kenobi off guard. And even then, she has though been proven to be able to penetrate the force barriers of other force users on a consistent level. The only combatants that I believe that could openly penetrate Kenobi's barriers at will would be either wielders that are on his level of power, or those who possess power far greater than his own. When it comes to Exar Kun in this particular department, there is absolutely no denying that not only was Exar Kun the most dangerous Sith Lord during his era, but that he would become one of the most powerful Sith Lords in galactic history. As a young Padawan, Kun showed to have an extremely powerful connection to the Force. During his training under Vodal Stial's boss, he adapted mastery of the classic Force abilities the Jedi were known for, such as Force augmentation to increase his speed, strength, and agility. As a Jedi, his use of telekinesis was strong but rarely used, as in one case he would use it to grab a hold of a close-by second lightsaber during a sparring match with his Jedi Master. As his power in the Force grew, so did his pursuit of forbidden knowledge, even going so far as to get a hold of holocrons so that he can learn from them. After making the transition to a Sith, his variety of powers would grow extensively in the sense, alter, and control abilities, and would learn such lethal abilities such as Force Lightning, Force Whirlwind, Force Rage, Force Wound, Dark Healing, and would even develop a skill with his use of Two Menace. One ability that even to this day remains a mystery was the ability that Kun used to kill Jedi Master Oden Ur, and there's no official source that states of whether or not this was a Force power or some kind of Sith spell, which we will talk about in a few moments. But it's my personal belief that even though Kun is not officially stated to have this ability at his disposal, what Kun did was perform a very powerful and concentrated form of Force Wound, which was known as Force Crush, meant to penetrate the powerful Master's Force barrier and target his internal organs. And rather than use it as a form of torture like Darth Vader would do, Kun went all the way and flat out killed the Master. Going over Kun's defensive Force abilities, the strength of Kun's own Force barriers are a bit hard to determine. However, it is my belief that they were considerably stronger than most, as the only individuals that have been shown to be able to penetrate Kun's barriers was the Jedi Master Oden Ur and the Sith entity Freedon Nad. In Oden Ur's case, Kun recovered immediately and was able to retaliate, meaning that only absolute top-level masters in the Force could even threaten him in that way. While on Yavin 4, Kun managed to recover a powerful Sith amulet that once belonged to Naga Sadah, and not only did it act as an amplifier enhancing Kun's already heightened strength with the Force, but it allowed Kun to fire off powerful blasts of dark-side energy that could do anything from simply incapacitating a target to possibly completely disintegrating the target, as Kun was successful with using his Force amulet to completely obliterate the entity of Freedon Nad. As powerful as Kun was with the Force, he was equally powerful with his use of Sith sorcery and Sith alchemy. He was capable of reshaping life forms and transforming them into dark-side-wielding monsters. He could use his power to take over weak-minded subjects, and on a grand scale used another powerful Sith spell to immobilize all of the members present during a Senate meeting, though all the Jedi present were not affected. It's unclear whether or not the Jedi present were actively immune, or Kun simply decided to target non-Force sensitives, but regardless, this was an impressive show of his magnitude and control that Kun had at his disposal. Though it may not play a factor in this particular matchup, I do believe that it is still worth mentioning that Kun's most powerful display of power was when he managed to perform a powerful Sith ritual, sacrificing his entire Masashi population on Yavin 4 in order to connect his spirit to the temple that he had built. And even after nearly 4,000 years of being dormant, his powerful strength in the Force had not diminished one bit, despite, like his Sith master, no longer having a physical body to call his own. This department is extremely easy to call. If Obi-Wan Kenobi as a Force user embodied everything that the Jedi stood for and using the Force for knowledge and defense, then Kun embodied everything that the Sith stood for and using the Force for power and control. And regardless of how creative Kenobi can be with his use of the Force by using the simplest abilities at his disposal to their maximum effect, that is sadly not going to be nearly enough to withstand or even off-balance the pure amount of destructive power that Kun can bring down upon him. Offensively, everything Kenobi can do, Exar Kun can do on a far greater magnitude and even in some cases control. Kenobi's use of the physical force augmentation allows him to fight against Kun on an equal level, despite being far durable than Kun. His use of telekinesis is eclipsed by several times. His use of Tutaminis is useless because without his lightsaber, not only can't he defend himself against Kun's force lightning, but he doesn't stand a chance if he gets hit by his use of Darkside energy blast from Kun's amulet. His ability to allow the Force to take control of his body is only useful during lightsaber combat when he's on the defensive, and his Force barriers, while not as weak as many would like to think, against Kun they might as well be made of tissue paper. Kenobi has no reliable defensive technique against Kun's use of Force Whirlwind, and if I am right and the power that Kun did use to kill Master Odin was indeed Force Crush, then Kun wouldn't even need nearly as much time to concentrate to pull off the same result to kill Kenobi. During Kenobi's era, there are only, in my opinion, two Force users that are powerful enough to contend with everything Exar Kun can bring to the table, and even then, they're gonna have their work cut out for them. But unfortunately for my man Obi, he is simply not on their level. Exar Kun gets the dominant edge in Force abilities. The lightsaber that Kenobi wielded as a Jedi Master was a very basic design meant to be able to be easily taken apart for maintenance when needed. The hand grip was located in the center section of the hilt and had a series of rings with a much smaller rear grip being placed right below the activation switch. The power cell was located at the bottom of the hilt with the activation switch being throttle style with a safety button being located on the side of the activation switch. Kenobi's lightsaber was fitted with a single blue hue Adagan crystal as a focusing lens. The weapon was also built with water seals inside to protect the electronic circuiting and operated by using a bifurcating cylindrical ignition pulse, allowing the weapon to be functionable underwater. Though lightsabers used by the Jedi were meant to be elegant weapons, it is clear that Kenobi built his particular lightsaber for war, capable of being operational in any environment that he found himself in. Equipment-wise, though Kenobi would wear parts of clone armor alongside his Jedi robes, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, Kenobi had abandoned these armor pieces, perhaps in a way to grant him some extra flexibility, as wearing body armor of any kind would restrict a person's movement by some percent, but by doing this, it would make Kenobi far more vulnerable to blaster bolts and physical strikes. Exar Kun wielded an archaic saber staff that was modified from his original standard lightsaber that he used while he was still widely known as a Jedi. By using schematics that he came across after studying a Sith holocron, thanks to his master's lessons in designing lightsabers, this more than anything helped Kun successfully add the improvements to a standard lightsaber while adding a number of mechanical additions to increase the weapon's lethality. The first addition that he made was to install a second emitter matrix on the opposite end, enabling the weapon to ignite two blades at once, or one at a time. The next addition that he included was a diagnostic system allowing Kun to control the blade lengths and power settings at both ends. Each individual blade had their own collection of focusing crystals, which were undoubtedly blue hue Adagan crystals, which in my opinion was a very smart decision when one takes in part the style of combat that Kun favored. Instead of adopting the classic red synthetic crystals commonly used by the Sith, the blue crystal allowed a user better control of their weapon rather than focusing on striking power as the red crystals typically did, making Kun one of the very few Sith in galactic history who did not adopt using a red blade. Kun's saber staff was also installed with a dual phase function, allowing Kun to change between multiple different blade lengths with the simple press of a button, with his blade lengths ranging between a shortened half meter to a standard meter to an extended meter and a half. Because of the hild's standard length, it did not suffer from the typical weaknesses associated with double-bladed lightsabers by having an extended center that an opponent could target. Exar Kun was also equipped with a powerful Sith amulet that was once stated to belong to Naga Sadah, and not only amplified Kun's strength in the Force, but it allowed him to channel the dark rage within his own heart to fire blasts of dark side energy that could either disable or kill any target that was hit by this beam. Finally, after Exar Kun established the Brotherhood of the Sith alongside fellow fallen Jedi Ula Kildroma, Kun went on to wear Sith robes that had elements of traditional battle armor that were protected in multiple areas of Kun's body. When it comes to their weapons and equipment, there's really no need to go into extensive detail as for which combatant has the better set. Kenobi's lightsaber is a well-built weapon, but compared to Kun's saber staff, it is painfully basic. It is much more comparable to Kun's original lightsaber model, and because of that, it was ultimately nothing special. Much like Count Dooku's curve-hilted lightsaber, Exar Kun modified his weapon to such a degree that it actually enhanced the specific style of combat that he would prefer, granting him greater combative options to off-balance and confuse his enemies. And because of his hild's shortened length, it's the kind of weapon that Kenobi would have never seen before, and therefore would have an extremely difficult time defending against. On top of that, Kun has access to a Sith amulet, which he could use at any time, and he is indeed wearing robes that do provide some protection, if not much. And as the old saying goes, some protection is better than no protection. And for these reasons, Exar Kun gets the edge in weapons and equipment. Obi-Wan Kenobi was without question one of the greatest lightsaber duelists in the Jedi Order's history. While being trained under Master Qui-Gon Jinn, Kenobi followed his master's approach by specializing in Form 4 Utaru. Form 4 Utaru, also known as the Way of the Hawkbat, was the most acrobatic form filled with numerous elaborate movements that relied on a user's ability to run, jump, and spin, using the Force to exceed physical feats that would be normally impossible. When taken to its highest level, users of Utaru could resemble nothing less than a blur of motion. The many movements of Utaru are based upon the falling leap technique, in which a user can perform a surprise attack then immediately fall back before the enemy has time to react, or attempt multiple short stabs in an attempt to force their opponent immediately into a defensive mode. And while Qui-Gon's use of Utaru was slightly modified to apply much more strength than usual to account for his advanced age, Kenobi's use of it was much more traditional, similar to someone like Grandmaster Yoda. Utaru in its purest form encouraged one to use their entire body as a weapon and not just rely on the blade, incorporating physical strikes and kicks if needed. However, Utaru's greatest weakness was that due to the fact that it was so acrobatic in nature, that the form could tire out a user rather quickly, and Kenobi saw firsthand after witnessing the death of his master. After witnessing this, Kenobi would decide to take on a much more defensive fighting style to prevent himself from making the same mistake that Qui-Gon made, and would go on to study Form 3 Surisu. Form 3 was originally developed to counter the widespread use of blaster technology, but over time it would be easily adapted for lightsaber combat. Surisu provided maximum defensive protection in a way that was characterized by using tight, efficient movements to conserve stamina. Masters of Surisu were thought to either hold their ground and allow their opponent to tire themselves out attempting to penetrate their defense, or could be seen to be making tactical retreats, giving the illusion that the offensive attacker was in control of the fight, when in reality the complete opposite was happening. Surisu on a tactical level could be used as a fallback option should a combatant's offense be proven ineffective, or be used to allow a user time to strategize and wait for their opponent to leave themselves open or to make a critical mistake. Because of its passive mentality, Form 3 was criticized for being too defensive, which ultimately led to the creation of Form 5 Xian, and in a practical sense, remaining on the defense for too long would do nothing more but delay their inevitable defeat, which is why it was best used when applied alongside a much more offensive fighting form. Though Kenobi's skill level with Surisu at the beginning of the Clone Wars was more or less average, making it less than perfect, with the addition of 3 years of battlefield combat experience, numerous engagements against the likes of Count Dooku, General Grievous, Asajj Ventress, Darth Maul, and even Asajj Opress, as well as countless hours sparring against Anakin Skywalker, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan Kenobi's use of Surisu was nothing less than perfect, capable of even stonewalling General Grievous's quad-wielding lightsaber attack sequences, which was capable of striking out at 20 strikes a second, with Kenobi never needing to maneuver his body or position his blade an inch more than was needed to protect himself. Mace Windu once regarded Kenobi as the greatest master of Surisu during his time. However, it is my personal belief that Kenobi wasn't just the greatest user at his time, but he is the greatest user of Surisu who has ever lived. Though Kenobi's primary combative focus was to use a balance between using his Surisu and Ataru combination, he did manage to successfully incorporate small elements from other fighting forms into his lightsaber sequences, such as precision strikes and swings from Form 2, power blows and blast deflections from Form 5, and even incorporating force abilities into his lightsaber maneuvers from Form 6. Though it won't play a factor in this particular matchup, it is still worth mentioning that Kenobi was skilled with the use of Jar-Kai dual-wielding fencing, in which Forms 3 and 6 had specialized training with this style of combat. As a combat tactician, Kenobi may not have the precision of Dooku, or the fighting spirit of Anakin, or even the speed of Yoda, but what Kenobi did have was patience, always doing everything he was needed to do to survive and studying his opponents closely and waiting for an opening that he could exploit, or simply wait for his opponent to make a critical mistake. Exar Kun openly regarded himself as the greatest lightsaber duelist in the galaxy, and though that could certainly be somewhat questionable, what can't be questioned was that he was certainly a top-tier master of his style, and perhaps one of the most innovative lightsaber duelists in the Sith Order's history, having a perfect record of having never been defeated in a serious lightsaber duel. Exar Kun's chosen fighting style was Form 6 Naiman, also known as the Moderation form or the Way of the Rancor, and was the most hybridizing fighting form by incorporating elements from the preceding 4 forms. It wasn't as precise as Form 2, not as defensive as Form 3, not as kinetic as Form 4, or as dominating as Form 5. Naiman was originally developed not to focus on using any one single method for combat, but to allow a user to have multiple combative options at their disposal, allowing them to adapt to just about any combat situation they found themselves up against, making the transition between multiple different elements from different fighting forms much smoother. To compensate for Naiman's much more relaxed take on blade work, the form encouraged a user to integrate force powers into their attack sequences, most specifically the draw closer and pushing slash techniques. Though Kun was a highly proficient user of Naiman in the traditional sense, Kun very much went against the intended purpose of how the form was meant to be used, and instead modified it to be much more offensively aggressive and allow him to throw off and even confuse his adversaries. Naiman had specialized training with the use of Jar-Kai dual-wield fencing, and I believe that it was this element of Naiman that aided in Kun's mastering the use and functions of his archaic saber staff. While applying his single-bladed style, Kun's offensive was very strength-focused, with Kun applying hacks and slashes in an attempt to overwhelm his opponents, an element Naiman adapted from Form 5's Jim So. And Kun has been seen on occasion incorporating physical strikes alongside his blade maneuvers, which is an element taken from Form 4 Ataru. But once Kun activated the second emitter, his style changed significantly in becoming much more speed-focused, wielding his weapon with one hand. While both blades were activated, Kun would use one blade to block an incoming attack and quickly spin the hilt using the second blade to immediately counterattack. During combat, Kun would regularly change the blade lengths and power levels of each individual blade to confuse, trick, and off-balance his opponents. Kun has also incorporated the skill set known as Trikata, which allows a user to deactivate their blade as their opponent's attack or blocking maneuver is presented, and therefore bypassing their blade before igniting their weapon, allowing them to strike their opponent directly. Due to Kun being a Naiman practitioner, it may mean that he hasn't elevated any one style in his arsenal to the highest level that he could have, but what Kun can and does do is switch between sudden and radically different styles, and the fact that his approach to combat when fighting with both hands activated is just as much of a danger to himself as it is to the opponent, but yet Kun has never once been defeated, shows his impressive level of control and awareness of his own weapon, which could be seen to be the most dangerous lightsaber ever built. Due to Exar Kun's impressive use of adapting the form of Nine-Man to suit his own personal approach rather than the other way around, Kun was just about prepared for any combat situation that he found himself in, whether it was in widespread conflicts on the battlefield or against a single well-trained opponent. And what's more is that he had multiple options to deal with all these scenarios. In conclusion, his approach to combat was to be as flexible as possible while avoiding to use any predictable patterns that an opponent could pick up on, and while at the same time attempting to off-balance and confuse his adversaries. And if at any moment he doesn't gain the results he wants, he can smoothly change up his methods on the fly until his opponent makes a fatal mistake or is completely overwhelmed. This department is by far the most important one to determine. And because of its significance, I'll be using it to not only determine who gets the martial and tactical edge, but who would ultimately emerge as the winner. As I stated at the very beginning of this video, I am extremely biased towards both combatants, so the idea of one of them losing here is a very difficult reality for me to accept. But unfortunately for my main man Obi, the greatest weapon that a Jedi can wield, that being the Force, will ultimately lead to his own downfall. When I analyze this particular fight strictly in terms of their lightsaber skills and approaches, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Exar Kun are perfect foils for each other, as Kenobi's perfect stonewall defense would be significant enough to deal with everything Kun could throw at him, having shown that he can contend with high levels of precision, strength, speed that Kun himself can dish out. Even Kun's use of Chakata is nullified because with Kenobi keeping his blade close to his body, he takes away the amount of space that Kun would need in order to attempt this. However, this also would end up working against Kenobi because once Exar Kun realizes that none of his approaches to combat, either with his single-bladed style of combat or with his double-bladed style of combat, are proving results, it would take Exar Kun back a bit because this is something he's never encountered before, and though he would certainly stay on the offense, I do not believe that he would attempt to increase the pressure or overextend himself, as Kun has learned from experience what happens when you do this, and it would be a mistake. Kenobi is a very frustrating combatant to fight against and a very convincing actor, and presenting that his defense is just on the verge of breaking, tempting you to increase your offense just a little bit more, then you suddenly find yourself overextended and cut down. But what Kun's erratic offense does is keep Kenobi locked in defensive mode, knowing that if he doesn't attempt to go on the offense or attempt to counterattack, then Kenobi is simply denying his inevitable defeat. Kenobi is waiting for Exar Kun to overextend himself, and Exar Kun is waiting for Kenobi to counterattack. As lightsaber duelists, both combatants would be placing bait in front of the other's face, but neither man would be willing to bite, which would ultimately encourage one or both men to break up the stalemate by using the Force, and once this happens, it's all over for Kenobi. A good example of this can be seen during Anakin and Kenobi's final duel against Count Dooku in Revenge of the Sith. As stated in the novelization,
so clear in Dooku's mind that he almost failed to notice that Kenobi met every one of his thrusts without so much as moving his feet, staying perfectly centered, perfectly balanced, blade never moving a millimeter more than was necessary, deflecting without effort, riposting with flickering strikes and stabs swifter than the tongue of a Garolian ghost viper. And when Dooku felt Skywalker regain his feet and stride once more toward his back, he finally registered the source of that blinding defensive velocity Kenobi had used a moment ago. And only then, belatedly, did he understand that Kenobi's Ataro and Shi'icho had been ploys as well. Kenobi had become a master of Sarisu.
Dooku, like Exar Kun, used a specialized weapon to enhance the skill set of his chosen lightsaber fighting form, and forced to admit that even though his skills in Makashi were top level, that they were no longer efficient enough to get through Kenobi's defenses, causing the Count to have to use the Force in order to dispatch Kenobi and remove him from the fight, and Exar Kun would eventually end up doing the same thing. While Kenobi's physicality build and his skill set and tactical mindset are set for the long haul for battles of attrition, Exar Kun just doesn't have the patience for this type of engagement and demands results quickly. Let's say that this fight takes place a few months after the events of Revenge of the Sith. While on Tatooine, Kenobi receives a message from the Force that he needs to travel to Yavin 4 for a specific reason. Feeling that he can take a tiny break from watching the infant Luke Skywalker, Kenobi manages to take a ship to Yavin 4, and once there enters a temple that he's unfamiliar with. Not long after entering the temple, a powerful beam of dark side energy rises from the ground, revealing it to be Exar Kun, now resurrected somehow. With Kenobi realizing that he cannot allow Exar Kun to escape the temple, he draws his lightsaber and prepares for battle, with Exar Kun doing the same. I see this fight playing out over 3 stages. Stage 1 would have Exar Kun going on the offense with his single-bladed style, and since it contains elements of Gem So, Kenobi is able to easily block and counter every strike that Kun attacks him with, having known someone who is a far superior user of Gem So in both skill and style, while at the same time Kenobi is already planning a countermaneuver to take Kun down quickly. The beginning of Stage 2 would start with Exar Kun realizing that his single-bladed fighting style is not enough to get the job done. He then immediately activates the second emitter, revealing his weapon to be a double-bladed saber staff, and now whatever plan Kenobi was setting up for during Stage 1 has completely gone out the window. And though he has had experience against double-bladed lightsaber duelists before, Kenobi realizes that this is going to be a bit different. Kenobi brings his lightsaber closer to his body and prepares for Kun's assault, and as Kun's double-bladed offense begins, Kenobi allows the flow of the Force to pass through his body the same way it did during his final battle against General Grievous. This allows Kenobi to defend and evade every single strike and attack attempt that Kun can dish out, even with his constant changing of his weapon's blade length and power settings. And though Kenobi is successful in defending and keeping himself alive, he is unable to see any kind of pattern in Exar Kun's maneuvers and can't risk a counterattack or even attempting a physical strike, sensing that Exar Kun is trying to bait him. This goes on for a few minutes, and Exar Kun is absolutely astounded that for the first time in his life, someone has managed to perfectly defend themselves from everything that he is throwing at Kenobi, and his radical style changes with his blade are not working, which is something that not even his own master could handle. As Stage 3 begins, Exar Kun's frustration has officially hit a new boiling point, as for the first time in his life, his single-bladed fighting style and his double-bladed fighting style have presented no results. So it's officially time to get mad and bust out the Force powers, with Kenobi thinking the same thing, knowing that if he doesn't do something to get any kind of offense in and end this stalemate, then he is as good as dead. Almost simultaneously, both men break away with their lightsabers and both attempt a Force push, but instead of entering a power lock similar to what happened against Anakin, it's Kenobi that is sent flying back hard, suffering minor injuries. Exar Kun immediately recognizes that Kenobi is significantly weaker than he is in the Force, and follows this up with a powerful blast of darkside energy from his amulet, channeling his rage. Kenobi manages to avoid a direct hit, but is still caught in the blast radius and suffers even more injuries. Exar Kun continues his assault by picking Kenobi up with his telekinesis and begins tossing Kenobi around like a rag doll, slamming his body into walls and pillars. At this point, Kenobi has already lost his lightsaber, with Kun slamming Kenobi's body into the ground one last time. Kun walks over to his now beaten and broken opponent, who is barely alive and unable to move. With the final comment, Exar Kun commends Kenobi's incredible lightsaber defense, but it is now his time to become one with the Force. Exar Kun then reaches out with his hand one last time and performs a Force crush on Kenobi's heart, killing the Jedi Master, leaving his body in the ruins of his temple. I grant Exar Kun the edge in martial skills and as a battle tactician, ultimately declaring Exar Kun, the Dark Man, the winner. And that concludes my very first Star Wars vs. Series matchup. Please let me know how I did, going back to using my old school style of analyzing for the last time for this particularly personal matchup that I've brought here. And if you happen to have any additions, corrections, or breakdowns, don't be afraid to post them in the comments down below. Just remember to be respectful. Like always, I would like to thank all of you guys for watching, if you actually happen to watch this extended video in its entirety, because I think it is amazing. And like always, here's a preview of my next Versus Series matchup coming out next month. I'll see you next time.